Okay, here we go, guys. Our objective for today is to solve an equation involving an absolute value. So we have to remember a little bit what absolute values actually do. So I'm going to start up here above this box a little bit. If you don't have room in your notebooks, that's fine. Just watch this. Okay, if I ask you to take the absolute value of -3, what would that be?
3.
3. That's absolute value, so it would be 3. Okay, so my answer would be 3. What if I told you to take the absolute value of +3? What would you get?
-3.
Nope, it's still +3. The absolute value is the distance of the number from 0 on the number line. So if I made a number line, and I had 0 here, and 3 was over here, and -3 was over here, they have the same distance. That's why these have the same answer. Okay? So when you have absolute value, there's 2 possible numbers in here that could give you an answer of 3. I want you to be thinking about that as we look at the equations. So if I have this equation down here, this is the absolute value of x, some unknown number is 5. There are 2 possibilities for x. What would they be?
5 and -5.
5 and -5. So we would have that x could be 5, or x could be -5. And that's the main idea for what we're going to do with these equations today, is that you're going to have 2 possible answers. Okay? Now, if I have the absolute value of x equals -5, there's a problem. Why is that just like not okay?
Because it can't be negative because it's absolute value.
Exactly. This always is going to give you a positive number. This negative is not possible. And so if you get something like that, then we're going to say no solutions.
Or the 0.
Or the little 0 with the slash. Exactly, the little null set. So you need to watch out for that. If I have something in absolute value and it's equal to a negative, then that's just not possible.
So that's like no solution.
It's no solutions, because absolute value is the distance between a number and 0 on the number line. It's never going to come out negative. We don't measure distances with negatives. They're always a positive number of units. Okay, so the equations are going to have a few more steps than these, but that's like the general underlying idea for today. So I'm going to show you how we're going to attack these.
Wait, are they going to be hard?
No. So on the next example, I have the absolute value of x minus 3 equals 15. This is what you're going to do. You're going to draw 2 little arrows, and we're going to separate this into 2 equations, taking the absolute value off. The first one, you just take the absolute value off. X minus 3 equals 15. The second one, we're going to take the absolute value off and make it x minus 3 equals -15. Remember that what's in here could be positive or negative before you take the absolute value. There's 2 possible answers that are going to give us that 15. And so the left-hand side, when I take the absolute value off, it just becomes x minus 3. On the first one, we use positive 15. On the second one, negative 15. And we just have to solve them both. So how would I solve x minus 3 equals 15?
Add 3.
Just add 3.
Add 3 to the 15.
And I get 18, so that's an answer I'm in a box. Over here, we're going to add 3 to the -15.
Which would be
-12, and those are my answers, and I'm done. So
Really?
there's just 2 answers. Now there's a place down here that says check. I'm going to show you just so that you'll have this clear in your mind why both of these work. If I take and put 18 in for x, I'd have the absolute value of 18 minus 3, which is the absolute value of 15, which is 15. That one's pretty easy to check, and you know that that's okay. If I put in -12, it's a little bit more confusing, because I'd have the absolute value of -12 minus 3. But -12 minus 3 is just -15. And then when I take the absolute value, I just get 15. So you can check to make sure that both of your answers work just by putting it back in and then doing the absolute value, which makes it positive. So I'm not going to make you write down how to check it on each one, but I want you to realize when you turn in your paper, you really shouldn't miss anything, because you could either mentally or on a piece of paper or with a calculator be checking each and every one of these. You have the power to know if it's right or not. Okay? So let's go on to the next one. Now, on the next one, there is a plus 7 that is not inside the absolute value. So you have to solve for the absolute value first. You cannot separate it into the plus and the positive and negative numbers until this part is all by itself. So how am I going to move that plus 7? Go ahead.
You're going to have to subtract.
Can't distribute. Adrian, what do you think? Subtract 7. You cannot distribute with an absolute value. It doesn't work right. So we still have the absolute value, 2x minus 3, and then equals 25. Good. So we do this first. We got the absolute value all by itself first, and I have the number over here. That's when you go ahead and break it apart. So then I would have 2x minus 3 equals positive 25. And 2x minus 3 equals negative 25. So you cannot break it apart until you have this absolute value all by itself. There's nothing on the outside. Alrighty, so these are two-step equations. How do I solve the first one? What do I do first?
Oh.
Go ahead.
Add 3 and then divide by 2.
Okay, so we're going to add 3 to both sides. That'll give us 2x equals 28. And then you're right, we would divide by 2 next. So it's just normal solving equations when you get to this point. We get x equals 14. All right, and we do the same steps over here, except it's with negative 25, which will change the answers a little bit. So we are going to add 3. What do I get if I add 3 to negative 25? Negative 22, good. And then we still divide by 2 to get x by itself, and we'll get x equals negative 11. And I don't have room in this little box to check it, but you could put those back into the original and see that you would get 32, and both of those will work. So if there's something just added or subtracted, on the outside of that absolute value, use addition or subtraction, whatever the opposite is, to get this absolute value by itself. Okay, the next one is slightly different. On the next one, I don't have something added or subtracted. I just have this 3 right here. You cannot distribute.
Why?
Because if this were a negative number, it changes a bunch of stuff. You don't distribute. We could divide, because this is multiplied. So we could divide both sides by 3, since that's being multiplied by the whole thing. And then we have the absolute value of x minus 4 equals 6. So that's how you can get that off the front, since we can't really distribute. All right, so now we have the absolute value isolated over here. There's nothing on the outside of the absolute value. So we can set up our equations. So x minus, oh, I just wrote the wrong number. X minus 4 equals 6, and x minus 4 equals negative 6. And we're going to solve both of those. So how do I solve this for x?
Add 4.
Add 4 to both sides. We get x equals 10. We're going to add 4 over here because it's still minus 4. And we get x equals negative 2.
And that's your answer, right?
No, sure.
Both of those are your answers, yes.
Okay.
So you'll either have 2 answers or you'll have no answers. Is typically how this
The
goes.
last one was 2 answers as well? Like
Yes, there was 14 and negative 11 on the last one. So each of these, you're getting 2 answers. Occasionally, you'll get no answers. Okay, so on this, I cannot do the 2 equations yet. What would I have to do first?
Minus 12.
Minus 12. Okay, and so then I'm going to have the absolute value of 2x plus 3 equals negative 7. I want you to think about that for a second. What's wrong with that?
You still have the absolute values?
I still have the absolute value, but what do I have over here?
It's not
Negative.
Negative. So this absolute value, an absolute value, is always going to equal a positive.
Oh.
Having the negative over here is not possible. And so we don't even have to break this one apart and solve it. We're just going to say
No solution.
no solutions.
Oh. Snap.
Now, let me give you an example of somewhere where people sometimes make mistakes. You can just watch this. I'm going to write it on the back of this sheet, and then I'll...
So a negative
Good.
is not possible.
So then if you have an absolute value with nothing else there, then it's not possible. But let me give you something that is a little tricky. You don't have to write it down. If you want to write it on your practice page, you could. But otherwise, you could just watch. Let's say I have absolute value of x minus 2 plus, or no, I'm going to make it minus
We can't see it.
8 equals negative 5.
Oh.
Sometimes people start off and go, oh, this isn't possible, but
Oh, there's plus 8.
you don't know yet because you would have to get the absolute value by itself. So before I could tell if it was possible or not, I have to get the absolute value by itself because it's the absolute value that's always going to be a positive. And then this one would actually work and it would be fine. Okay? So isolate the absolute value first and then check to make sure it's possible. And then if it is possible, go ahead and solve.